Hello, I'm Lee Bernick, Dean of the Greenspun College of Urban Affairs, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Urban Report. In this edition, our first guest is a faculty member here, it's sort of, but more importantly for us, is a fellow at Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C., and she comes out here periodically. Audrey Singer is a senior fellow, is that correct? And as a senior fellow, your major area is in immigration, is that right?
That's right. I work in the Metropolitan
Policy
program.
Policy area, which is associated with the Brookings Mountain West.
Right. So Brookings Institution has an office here at UNLV, and I'm in the Metropolitan Policy program at Brookings, where we study the full range of issues affecting cities and suburbs.
Right, and we'll get to one of those things, one of those topics that really does focus in on local governments for us, state and local governments, in a second. So when you come out here, and you've been out here, this is not the first time you've been here.
No, I've been here several times.
You've been here several. What is it that you do when you come out here?
So when I come here, I try to learn as much as I can about the region, about Las Vegas as a city, as a region, as a workplace, as a place where people live. I explore the neighborhoods. I talk to as many people as I can in a formal way. I have a lot of meetings, but I also do a lot of informal poking around and talk to people. My interests are in how places change, and this is certainly a place that's changed tremendously over a very short period of time. So understanding those issues, particularly as it relates to immigration, is my primary interest here.
And so last night, you gave a talk, which is a typical kind of thing for a Brookings fellow to do when they're out here, and your talk was on immigration and your area of expertise. And let's talk about that, and it's particularly important for us here in Las Vegas. It is an important topic for us. But there are a lot of issues surrounding immigration, and I'm not sure that everybody fully understands some of those issues, but one of the issues that I think you talked about was an area about the labor force and how immigrants, the immigrant population is a significant part of the labor force. And I think we have a slide, if we can bring up the first slide, and that shows the changing pattern, if I right, of...
Yeah, so let me just say a few words. We're at a moment in time when Congress is talking about changing immigration policy.
Okay.
And one of the main pushes is in this moment where we've got slow economic growth, a lot of slower job growth than we've had coming out of the recession than we did before. There's a lot of talk about how to change our immigration system to better fit our economic needs and to think more about how immigrants are part of our economy. And so to help think about that, I've been doing some research on where immigrants fit into the labor force and the kinds of things that they do in this country.
Okay. Well, let me do this. I think we have some trouble with the technology, as good as we are about all these things. Let's talk about, we'll talk about those actual patterns maybe in our second segment, but let's talk about this big issue of the immigration reform. I know that you, my understanding, and I've seen some of the things that you've written while you're in D.C. about how this may be the best possible time in a long time. You talked about how we had immigration reform in 1986, is that right?
86 and 1990, that's the last time we had.
It's 1990, so 23 years ago was the last time we had
major overhauls.
Major overhaul. But there is some discussion about having a major overhaul today, this year, in this Congress. Why do you think this is a good time for this to happen?
I think, well, it's a good time for this to happen because a lot of the people who are critical to this conversation are actually having the conversation. So for the first time, we're seeing Republicans and Democrats working together in both the House and the Senate to think through what legislation would look like. We've already seen a list of principles come out of the Senate, bipartisan group of 8 senators worked on that, and they're working on legislation. we see a similar group in the House. There's a lot of pressure coming out of the White House as well. So President Obama has been talking about doing this for some time, and with so many people on board right now, the time is ripe.
Do you think, let me ask you, do you think that the Republican, House members, can they really get the package or the right coalition of House members, or are we going to have a bill that's really just a small number of Republicans and Democrats?
That's a great question. Well, let me first say that one of the conditions that is making this such a ripe time is what happened in the last presidential election. And immediately following the election, the Republican leaders began saying that we need, America's changing. We have a lot of problems with our immigration system. It's time to start doing something. So there's a lot of leadership that is pushing. But what you have pointed out is that a lot of representatives go home and hear from their constituents, and there's pressure coming from that direction as well.
So yes, and I think that's the real question, and maybe one of the things we'll get to in our next segment. But it is an interesting question about whether the leadership can get the rest of the caucus, especially the Republican. I don't think we have a problem with the Democratic caucus, do we?
Nothing like what we have.
Nothing like, and we don't have as much of a problem in the Senate as we do in the House. Is that?
That's fair to say, probably. But I mean, honestly, for the last time Congress tried to reform U.S. immigration laws was in 2007, and the discussions were deep and intense and contentious at a lot of the time, and at this point, it's just getting started. So I think as things happen, as we see the discussions continue, I think I could come back and answer that question a little better.
All right, so let's take a break. We're going to take a break right now for this segment, and we'll come back and talk to Audrey some more about immigration. Welcome back to this edition of the Urban Report, and we're here talking to Audrey Singer about immigration and the possibilities of immigration reform and some of the issues around immigration reform. And one of the areas that seems to be an important part of the discussion about immigration, and that's verification of workers, and that may be part of the new law, right? Any new law is going to have some kind of system to electronically or somehow say
to allow employers to check the status,
and that we would somehow have a penalty against employers who are hiring people who are not here legitimately.
Right.
Is that?
That's right.
And so the focus is on, in some ways, the workforce. And we have a chart. If we can bring up the first chart, one of the things that you see in this chart is that the line is going up. And can you talk about that?
Right. So this is a very simple graph that shows the share of immigrants in the total population and the share of the labor force that immigrants make up. And it starts in 1970, which was one of the lowest points in immigration in this country. Immigrants made up less than 5% of the total population and about 5% of the labor force. And you can see as the line goes up over the next several decades to 2010, the rising share in the labor force rises faster than the share in the total population.
Right. So now we're up to somewhere in the teens.
Right. We've got about 16% of the labor force are immigrants, and about 13% of the labor force immigrants.
And when we say immigrants, now we're talking both about legal and illegal?
We are talking about how they're measured in government surveys. So I use census data here. The question is about birthplace. That's all we know. We know whether they've become a U.S. citizen, so it includes people who are here on green cards, people who have naturalized, people who are here temporarily on business visas, work
we don't
visas,
know about obviously
students.
We don't know about the illegal.
Well, they're included in there to the extent that they've been included in the survey. And, there are a range of estimates about, the best ones say about half are included in these surveys.
Well, that's okay. One of the things that we see is that there are a larger percentage now. They've gone, where it was close, now they are actually overrepresented in
That's
the
right.
workforce. And I think there's a interesting chart, if we can bring up the second chart, and we have it up there. One of the reasons that we are overrepresented is that
immigrants come here to work.
They
So they're in the prime working ages. And on this graph, which is a population pyramid that shows both the native-born and the foreign-born populations, you can see that a smaller amount of the native-born population are in the prime working ages, 57%, whereas 79% of immigrants are in the 20 to 64
Right.
age range. So there's one other thing I have to say about that chart, though. You notice that the share of children who are immigrants is very small in those age categories, and that's because most of the children of immigrants were born in the U.S., so they're U.S. citizens, and they're included on the native-born side of that chart.
Well, that's an important thing, and that is a concern for some people who don't like the whole idea of discussion of immigration.
That's right.
Is
But there are some very good projections out there that have been done by the Pew Hispanic Center that show that over the next couple of decades, virtually all of the growth in our labor force will come from immigrants and their children.
Okay, so all of the labor force, we think, the growth in the labor force is going to be, we need that. I mean, frankly, I need
we're
that,
aging.
right? We're aging.
That graph shows how rapidly we're aging. The baby boomers just started to turn 65. There's 79 million of them. They're about to come through, and this country is about to get very old over the next decade. And
so we need this population. Can we bring up the third slide, which talks about what the labor force is doing? Isn't that right?
Right. So I looked at immigrants in certain industries, well, in all the industries in the U.S., and I focused on 4 that employ mostly lower skilled workers and 4 higher skilled workers.
And on this graph, you've got them, and there's this orange line which
right,
says...
the orange line is the 16% or so that represents the total share in the labor force that are immigrants. The green arrows show the lower skilled industries that I focused on: accommodation, food services, agriculture, and construction. Many of these are really important industries for this region in particular, just by coincidence. And then the 4 higher skilled are high-tech manufacturing, information technology, life sciences, and healthcare. Healthcare actually comes in a little bit below that 16% line, but has the largest number of immigrant workers in that. And altogether, in those 8 industries, 37% of all workers are foreign-born.
Okay. Let me do this. You talk about these different skill levels. We have a map that sort of demonstrates where people are going, if I'm not mistaken, or what parts of the country we have in terms of the immigrants and the labor force. And I think we have that up there now.
So this was a study I did with Matthew Hall, who's at Cornell University now, and we looked at the 100 largest metropolitan areas. We looked at the labor force, the immigrant labor force in each of them, and we assigned skill levels to everyone in that in each metro, and we made a ratio of high to low skilled immigrant workers. So you see in this map, the blue triangles represent metropolitan areas that are dominated by higher skilled immigrants, and the red downward facing triangles are dominated by lower skilled immigrants, and the green circles are a more balanced mix.
Well, we only have a few seconds here. This is just a fascinating discussion. What is important for us in the Southwest is that many of those in the Southwest immigrants are in the low skilled. Isn't that what the map shows? And that's one of the issues for us, is that we have low skilled immigrant workers.
That's right.